My name is Wright. I am the voice of reason. I speak for the Last Crusade.
The sexual revolution is over. It has failed. The failure presents us with a stark and simple choice. The first is to see reality, encourage and celebrate sexual differences, and thus preserve society. The second is to deny reality, deter and abolish sexual differences, and destroy society. The sexual revolutionaries promised that if men were not chivalrous, women were not modest, and no one was chaste, freedom would triumph, and equality between the sexes would be established. The Me Too movement proves that the sexual free-for-all between the unchivalrous, immodest, and unchaste puts women in a posture of permanent victimhood and exposes men to endless accusations and deters anyone from marriage. Sexual rules of behavior have not been abolished. They have merely become more restrictive than the rules promoted by Victorian prudes, have become less predictable, and the behaviors promoted dissolve rather than uphold the foundations of civilization itself. Therefore, there are two positions to take to interpret the meaning of the present impasse in the sexual revolution. The enemy position is that the sexual revolution has not failed, but merely fallen short, and so must be pushed to its final culmination. The enemy position is that the sexual revolution must redouble its efforts to break down sexual taboos even more vehemently. The enemy position is that no cultural or legal barrier can be allowed to hinder any indulgence in any sexual perversion whatsoever, no matter how costly, perverse, degrading, disgusting, insane, unhealthy, or dangerous. All vile things must be celebrated by all parties, everywhere, and at all times with deafening hysteria. Of the enemy position, little more need be said. The position is one of civilizational suicide. Sadly, the sole possible result of pursuing the logic of the sexual revolution to its final culmination is to embrace the insane ideology claiming sex itself is a social construct, hence open to reconstruction. But sex is innate to the human person, therefore reconstructing sex is destruction of the human person. The destruction of the human person, that is, the destruction of the norms of behavior, sexual or otherwise, can lead to nothing other than strife, hatred, and recrimination between the sexes, and the creation of the very rape culture the sexual revolutionaries claim to be against. Neither domestic life, nor the free market, nor military life, nor the arts, nor academia, nor the public laws, nor any institution can endure when men and women are in a posture of continual mutual strife, hatred, and condemnation. So the enemy position is madness. Once culture collapses, the counterculture has nowhere else to go but hell. The friendly position is that the sexual revolution has indeed failed. The revolution held out a false promise. It succeeded based on a false alliance, which is now breaking down. But the sexual revolution was intellectually bankrupt and indefensible a position to begin with, based on two patently false assumptions. The first false assumption was that men and women differ in no significant respect. Ergo, all culturally enforced norms of behavior either must be exactly the same between the two sexes, or must be condemned as oppressive and unequal. The second false assumption was that men are infinitely pliant and pliable, that the race can be molded and shaped to serve our convenience, and that all our passions and emotions can be controlled by a simple act of willpower, or peer pressure, or law. Hence, if the male desire to protect and pursue and domineer the female is socially inconvenient, it can be abolished without any fuss. More to the point, the female desire to be protected, to be pursued, and to be led by their mates is not merely inconvenient, it is abhorrent to the cause of female equality. Therefore, for the sake of feminism, all female qualities must be abolished. Femininity itself must be abolished. The sexual revolution promised that there would be no side effects, no unintended consequences to any attempt to abolish differences between male and female. There would be no males in female bathrooms, no males competing against girls in wrestling, swimming, and weightlifting, and no males incarcerated together with females in prisons. To be sure, the whole thing was a falsehood and a sick-minded fantasy from the beginning. There was no brave new world of consequence-free sex, where perfectly willing but perfectly equal partners of either sex in any number could be swapped back and forth in perfect freedom with perfect abandon, and everyone enjoyed a guilt-free worldwide orgy. It was false and sick from the beginning, but also illogical. The assumption that sex is so insignificant that social norms had no business restricting it to married couples is a direct logical contradiction to the assumption that sex is of utmost significance, so much so that social norms can and must be overridden whenever the all-important sexual impulse so demands. In the first case, the argument of the sexual revolutionary runs that the traditional roles of chastity, the norms of restrained behavior expected from gentlemen and ladies, and most of all the reverence and respect paid to virgins for their virginity and to matrons for their maternity, all of these are dismissed as petty and frantic, the fretful worries of benighted killjoys, Puritans, Victorians, and fussy busybodies. The first argument, hence, is that sex is unimportant, nearly a natural biological function, so you may not criticize the satyr for his whoring and his masturbation. It's no big deal, man. In the second case, the argument of the sexual revolutionary runs that the traditional rules of chastity are insignificant compared to the all-important, nay, the godlike authority of the unhindered sexual impulse. The intimacy, the raptures of ecstasy, the sublime pleasure, and indeed the self-expression of sex is asserted to have a higher priority than any merely human institution or norm of behavior. The second argument, hence, is that sex is all-important, the highest peak of human life, so one may not criticize the nymph for her harlotry and aborticides. 'Tain't nobody's business but her own. The two arguments contradict each other and yet conveniently reach the exact same conclusion. It is also the conclusion that a pleasure-seeking swine seeks to reach, since it justifies his behavior. More than justifies, these paired arguments actually invert morality, for now the virtue, chastity, has become the vice called self-repression, and the vice, unchastity, has become the virtue of boldness and self-actualization. Indeed, with the typical moral inversion of the left, to criticize a harlot for being a harlot is now called slut-shaming. Note that it is not said to be immoral to be a slut, only to point a finger at one. Armed with such fake arguments, the nymphs and satyrs can not only excuse their corrupt behavior, they can deride the decent behavior of their critics as immoral. The inversion of morals gives the lowest creature deeply sinking into the swamp of short-sighted self-indulgence the insolent pretense of occupying the high moral high ground. And the way the moral inversion works is this: the lower and more loathsome the nymph or satyr sinks down the moral slippery slope, the higher and higher he rises on the pinnacle of self-righteousness. So a man who steals a kiss is merely ungentlemanly, a cad who deserves a slap. But when the moral scale is inverted, he is merely ennobled to a position of a leader, someone to emulate. In olden times, this was the position of a noble. Whereas a sexual pervert, when the moral scale is inverted, achieves the position of unanswerable moral superiority and is treated like a saint, and saints outrank nobles. Pulled by the charging steeds of these two false and absurd assumptions, and flourishing the sharp sword of the inversion of morality as a weapon, while waving overhead the banner of false promises, on and on the war wagon of revolution ran, remorseless as a juggernaut. But the only ones trampled were its practitioners, who were locked in a false alliance. The false promise was that consequence-free and guilt-free sex was possible to the human race, that we could get the benefit without paying the cost. But as the old saying goes, there ain't no such thing as a free orgy. The false alliance was between the satyrs and the nymphs, by which I mean between the Hugh Hefners in his world and the feminists in their world. The disgusting young Hefners wanted free access to many willing, and, as it turns out, unwilling, partners as possible in order to slake their lust. The young feminists wanted not to be equal to men, but to be the same as men. And the men they selected to be the same as were the disgusting young Hefners. So both entered a sexual free-for-all with no rules and no holds barred. But human nature had not changed. Human nature had been denied, and anyone who spoke honestly about human nature was reviled and forced into silence. But, nonetheless, stubbornly, human nature had not changed. In human nature, men seek mate by pursuing them, and all is fair in love and war. Men want status, power, and wealth in order to win mates. In human nature, women seek mates by alluring mates, either as a virgin alluring a husband to wed, or as a whore alluring a John to be her sugar daddy. Women seek to allure men of status, power, and wealth. Such is human nature. In the context of traditional and rational moral prudence, the mating dance gives men opportunity to pursue, but deters any opportunity for molestation and assault, and also deters attempts to blackmail a girl onto the casting couch. In the context of the free-for-all ushered in by the sexual revolution, blackmailing a starlet onto the casting couch is considered fair game. She consents to couple with a powerful man, old enough to be her father, in return for his aid in advancing her career. A buxom young starlet being exploited by an older married man is permitted because it is considered a private matter, and consent is considered the sole criterion of legitimacy. In the deliberately blind logic of the sexual revolutionaries, treating sexual couplings as if they are contractual exchanges is a win for the counterculture, because it demeans romance from something sacred to something commercial and tawdry. And if the beardless youth is being sent to the casting couch as a catamite for sodomy, instead of a buxom young starlet being sent to the couch for sex, that is even better, because it tramples even more social norms. But the alliance between the nymphs and the satyrs has turned out to be much more advantageous for the satyrs than for the nymphs. The nymphs found out, to their shock and surprise, that by and large they do not like living like satyrs. Statistics show career women, even in prestigious careers like the legal field, express greater dissatisfaction and usually quit by age 30. You see, career women discover they cannot attract mates by gaining wealth and power. Women do not instinctively create power and dominion as men do. Women generally want to marry mates higher in the social rank than themselves. Becoming a highly educated professional, a woman actually lowers her available pool of mates, because the number of men higher in social rank diminishes. Also, the sad fact is that the kind of men attracted to a woman because of her power and wealth does not make a good mate. A girl who spends her parents' money on a college education or a grad school and pursues a career is losing the main thing that makes her attractive to mates: her peak years of youth, fertility, and beauty, not to mention her undivided attention available to be paid to homemaking and child-rearing. The higher she climbs on the social ladder, the fewer good mates she will find, and the more bad mates. In a world of a sexual free-for-all with no rules, the rules of primate sexual behavior prevail. The alpha in the ape troop gets many mates, which he uses or hands out to loyal beta male lieutenants in return for loyalty, and the low-class males get few mates or none. The women are treated like chattel and abandoned when no longer fertile. And at the same time, any woman with a low-status mate who has an opportunity for a higher one abandons him on the instant. Our current divorce statistics reflect this. 90% of divorces are instigated by the wife abandoning her family. Because of the freakish unfairness of the sexual revolutionaries' inverted morality, the males thus abandoned are typically excluded from child custody and burdened with the alimony and upkeep. In other words, they pay the price for being a husband, but the wife can ignore her duties as a wife and act like a widow, seeking new mates with shinier cars. Such a situation can produce only one result: hatred between the satyrs and nymphs. The inverted morality of the revolution honors them for exploiting each other and tells the young nymphs that they will be healthy and happy doing precisely the things suited for males to do in pursuing females as mates, but which, so it happens, when done by females, deters the males from pursuing them. So the nymph exploits the satyrs, marrying and divorcing for money, and the satyrs exploits the nymphs, marrying and divorcing for sex appeal, and throwing an older nymph away when younger, prettier trophy wife might become available. The satyrs grope, fondle, blackmail, and rape the nymphs, and the nymphs complain about the rape culture they help to create and sustain. But the current sexual inquisition and house cleaning that the Me Too movement might usher in, the alliance between nymphs and satyrs, it seems, has broken down. The nymphs tire of being groped and are no longer willing to support the system of lies needed to support the free-for-all. As said above, there's two possibilities at this point. When a lie breaks down, one possibility is to entertain the truth. The other possibility is to double down on the lie, sink ever deeper into deception, and tell more outrageous lies to cover the first lie, and then lose your soul. In the current age, this is what happened. Instead of returning to the sexual sanity of organizing society by sexual roles, the apparent solution to solve the turmoil caused by the sexual revolution is to take the revolution to the next step and embrace what is called gender ideology. Gender ideology is a claim so absurd and so idiotic that only a soul utterly broken, sick, and abandoned to sin and cowardice would dare voice it, namely, that sex does not exist at all. Any women wishing to avoid the fate of nymphs being molested by satyrs are advised simply to declare themselves male, or better yet, to declare herself as asexual as an amoeba, mutilating her sexual organs and injecting herself with unhealthy hormones. The choice, as I said, is between two options. The first option is a return to the freedom and sanity of public decency, and of civilized rules of behavior between the sexes, of men being masculine and women being feminine. The second option is to be ever more bricked into the torture chamber and madhouse of gender ideology and watch the world disintegrate through the prison bars. Civilization cannot exist without family life. Family life cannot coexist with gender ideology. Civilization and gender ideology are incompatible. So the choice is between two options: sex or sterility, sanity or madness, ecstasy or misery, life or death.